I'm now trying to be like my persona on stage, in that the part of me that's on stage is more relaxed, more together, sharper than my offstage personality.
Welcome to Before, During, After, a Smirk Experience podcast about performance from the inside. Every week, I'll sit down with a professional comedian to unpack how they prepare for a gig, what they're thinking about while they're on stage, and how they reflect once it's over. Because great performances don't just happen, they're built. Today's guest is James Dowdeswell, who's one of my closest pals in comedy. He hosts a Smirk show every month in South London. Plus, he married my wife and me in a mock ceremony a few years ago. He's a brilliant comic who's worked with hundreds of great acts, including Ricky Gervais in Extras. Dowdeswell and me discuss how getting punched in the face in front of 800 Geordies was the best thing that could have happened to him. A trick that stops hecklers cold. What actually happens when you watch yourself back. Plus the effect that using Joe brand saucepans had on Dowdeswell's career. Enjoy. Dowdeswell, one of the things I always marvel at with you is how natural you are on stage. Where did that come from?
That's very kind of you to say. I think it comes from gig hours. And so there's that famous Malcolm Gladwell, do your 10,000 hours like the Beatles did in Hamburg, and their timing improved. I think doing your 10,000 hours, it's got to the point now, I'm doing quite a lot of work on myself. And what I said to my therapist was, I'm now trying to be like my persona on stage, in that the part of me that's on stage is more relaxed, more together, sharper than my offstage personality.
That's fascinating. Did it take you a while to split up your two personas like that?
Didn't do it intentionally. When I first started doing stand up in the late 90s, I did quite a lot of characters and did quite a lot of voices and impressions. And I realized, or it was that I was hiding behind those. I had quite a few meetings with Jimmy Carr's agent, Hannah Chambers, who probably won't remember this, but she was very instrumental in my development, in that she said, at the moment you're funny, but you're hiding behind your characters, and you also are not yet able to read a room. When you learn to be yourself on stage and can read a room, you could be a very good comedian. In fact, I see you as an MC long term. And I bumped into her at a Joe Lycett recording, and I told her a couple of stories. She goes, "Oh my God, I don't remember telling you that." No, I was quite wise, wasn't I? So we had a good laugh about it. But there was a so yeah, when I started, I was very much I'd have like a character or a voice, and then I'd end with a punchline, and then gradually I developed 20 minutes where it was more sort of gag related, and then about in the early noughties, I started comparing these Army and RAF gigs for a friend of mine, Chris Gilbert at Bespoke Comedy, and you had to learn to compare there, and you had to talk to the troops. So you had to think off your feet. Because beforehand, I was really nervous saying anything that didn't have a punchline. So what I did was I practiced when I would say compare the Comedy Caf in East London. I would practice the after bit after an act's come off stage. I would practice giving up for so and so. You're not being funny. You're just saying a thing.
Yeah.
So that's really important to practice, because you can feel like you just have to be funny all the time, and that's not the case at all. And so when I did all these RAF gigs and army gigs, that toughened me up. Then in Edinburgh 2015, I took a show up where it was James Dowdeswell's Perfect Pub, and I would ask the audience what they would have in their perfect pub. So essentially, I was comparing for an hour, and doing that every day in Edinburgh for a month really helped me. Also, I was on at 7 o'clock. I was on exactly the same time in the next room to a member of your podcast, Illumini, Mr. Russell Hicks. And
Ah,
I would meet Russell for a drink beforehand. He'd have a coffee, I'd have a beer. And we would talk about getting a mindset, and we would talk about how we would go on stage and not do material. And he really helped me in that respect. He gave me a bit of confidence to do that. So then after Edinburgh 2015, I was comparing quite a bit, but now I split it. When I'm comparing, I tend to improvise in the first section, but also do a few jokes. And then in the second section, I tend to do my own material mostly. I might have a little bit of a chat. And then the last section, I'll either do a joke or a callback or check something in the room and then bring on the headliner.
got you.
When I'm doing a set, if I'm closing and uh, the compere hasn't necessarily spoken to the audience. For example, there was a great club called the Comedy Pub, which Mike Maneri used to run. And Mike was an excellent compere, but he didn't used to speak to the audience per se. It was kind of pretend chat with the audience. So nobody had spoken to the audience. So I went on and I hung my whole set off chat. I'd still do jokes, but it'd all be off chat. It used to work really well. But having said that, if everybody's chatted to the audience, for example, on last Thursday, I did a gig in Stone Market. Compere was a lovely guy, Martin Westgate. He was talking to the audience. First guy was John Pearson, who's a great crowd work comedian. So I then deliberately didn't do any crowd work because that had been done.
Yeah, got
So
it.
I,
It's really handy to be able to kind of change gears like that. Like
yes,
one thing I've always thought about you, your style is incredibly conversational. How do
yes,
you make something sound like you're just chatting to mates rather than delivering material?
yes. When I do my beer show, I deliberately take a pint of beer on. I don't necessarily, I've realized that watching a video back, I might only take 2 sips during the hour, but I'm holding it. But the conceit is that I'm a mate talking at the bar. And so we're
Yeah,
holding a
right.
conversation. So when I do my beer show, even though I'm dropping in jokes, it feels like I'm having a conversation at the bar. And that's very much my comparing style. And uh, yeah, it is conversational. I did when I started. I had very much a rhythm, um, and I always listened to a lot of rap music. So a few of my opening lines, rhythm. For example, in the early noughties, my opening line. You can't probably say this now, but it was um, the thing is, it's not fair. I used to have big hair like Sideshow Bob, and I used to say the thing is, it's not fair because a black guy with an afro looks damn funky. White guy with an afro, physics teacher. So I had a definite rhythm to it. Um, that's not conversational, but it has a rhythm to it. Whereas now I might mention that I look like a computers geek, but that works best when the compere has spoke to somebody in the audience, and chances are somebody does IT, and so I can say something. Oh, lovely people. We've got a carpenter, an accountant, and an IT guy. Of course, I don't know anything about. So it just comes in as conversational
Yeah.
rather than here he comes with his joke. Um, so I think that stand up in the current climate, if you really like comedy, you can go online and watch your favorite comedians. Whereas I think coming to a live show, you want to see something live happening in the room. So it needs to feel organic as possible, I think.
No,
Um,
definitely. I can remember doing with you a corporate gig that I was hosting and you were closing, and it was a bit of a strange setup. The bar was in the middle of the room and the
yes.
stage was at one end. And you said to me in one of the breaks, we were using a radio mic, and you said, would you mind if I did this just propped up at the bar?
Yes, I remember.
And I said, no, I don't have a strong opinion on that, buddy. And you did it, and it was just phenomenal. Because you've got a thing as well where you'll sometimes enter a stage through the crowd
Yes.
instead of from the sort of side, which is normal. And I suppose that was a kind of continuation of that theory. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I think that it's about connection for me. If you're coming on at the back of the room, through a door, for example, without name dropping, the Comedy Store, London, not many people are going to say this. I don't find it the easiest room to play because you're coming out of a dressing room. We're talking to some comedians, walking through a door into another room. Whereas I like to be in the room and then walk onto the stage. Um, so I think it did your gig quite recently in Lingfield, where most comedians come on from the side of the back. I came on for the back of the room because I feel like I'm in the room and you feel that atmosphere. What happened with the corporate you're talking about is partly that, and partly when I first started doing comedy, I was lucky enough to support Phil Kay on a tour.
Right.
Now, at that point, I had 15 minutes, and my material was very much a material comic. I didn't deviate from that. I had 15 minutes of stand up, as few impressions, etc. Whereas Phil Kay would come on, and he'd come on and say, "Hello, I'm Phil. I'm a Scottish comedian." And after that, it was pretty much improvisation.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but what I noticed he would do, if it wasn't working, he would mix it up. He would go in a different part of the stage, stand in the audience, take the gig to the back of the room, just change it up. For example, that night we were talking about, I just noticed the energy in the room was at the back corner rather than the front, and there was a bit of a gap between us and the. So I thought, right, I'm going to go and stand in the eye of the storm and deliver my little bit, and that worked quite well. And I think it worked well because I was the closing act. I had a little bit of gravitas to do that. I wouldn't have done it if I was opening or in the middle. It would have seemed a bit arrogant. But as the closing act, I felt I had gravitas. If check with the promoter if it's all right if I do that. Um,
Absolutely. It worked brilliantly that night. Tell me, have you got any tips if you are in a green room before you would start the gig in order to kind of get a feel for the room before you start?
Yes, I will always have a walk around the room. It depends on the size of the venue. If it's a large venue, especially those old jonglers ones, I used to walk around the back of the room and feel what the sight lines were like at the back left, back right, whether you could hear or not. Because sometimes you can easily speak to somebody in the front row and you deliver your whole act down to the front row and you're missing somebody. There's another level you've missed, so they feel like you're ignoring them. I will also often go to the bar. The bigger clubs, they'll often say, "Oh, can we get you a drink?" And I'll say, yeah, "That's very kind. I'll go to the bar and do it myself." I'm not being polite. It's that by queuing up to the bar, you can then chat to people and find out who's out on a night out, what kind of people are there. Um, Especially in say central London, you might find that there's a big group from Brazil, or there's a few French people, or there's a stag there, and you can find out things without having to ask, "Is there any in?" You already know kind of who's in, so it just saves a bit of time asking things, especially now when comparing. I'll often sort of walk around the room and find out a few things, saves asking and finding dead ends. Um, if you found out half the information beforehand. And I learned that with corporates, they'll often, which some of them you book, you'll often have a phone call a few days before, and they might tell you who's in the room. And I suddenly thought, hang on a minute, in a comedy club, we're going in cold. You can kind of find out who's in the room beforehand by going around chatting to people. So I do that a little bit so you can find out
Yeah.
who's in the room. Um, for example, years ago, this is like 15 years ago, I remember doing a gig in Nottingham, and this I was on first, and I stayed to watch the middle acts. He was a friend of mine, and he didn't do that well, and his material was excellent. He came off and goes, "Oh, they just didn't go for me." I went, "Yeah, but did you know who's in the audience? This was a student crowd, and yet he was doing stuff about borrowing his neighbour's lawnmower, etc., and about his mortgage, and about his wife. It was all funny stuff. But when you do realise the average age in there is 19, 20, and because he hadn't walked around the room, he didn't know.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
and
Definitely.
and you think, oh, you know that, and he came off feeling bad. I think, no, it's got nothing to do with you. You just pitched it wrong. You just didn't know who you're speaking to.
I think quite a lot of speakers, whether they're comedians, business communicators, or what, it is so easy when you're preparing to only focus on yourself.
Yes.
This is how I'm going to walk on. This is the first thing I'm going to say. Then I'll do crowd work. And you just get this kind of like tunnel vision of what the plan
Yes.
is. But the real cut through, I think, is working out who's in front of you. That's what the really good ones do, isn't it?
Exactly. And it really comes into play when you're trying to new bits. I go through stages when I like to try at least one new bit, maybe two new bits per set if possible. Now you get to maybe it's a Friday night, you've got the train there, you've practiced your new bits, you've got them at your fingertips, but you walk out and you think, do you know what? These two new bits are about football and the audience is clearly not a football crowd.
Yeah.
Just don't do the new bits. Just put them aside and do them at another gig. It's so easy to think I'm going to do my new bit anyway, and it won't work because it's not the right night for the gig. Or another night, you'll go, hang on, this is the perfect time to pop in, or you might be chatting, or I can pop in that bit I wrote last month that I forgot to try. So it's
Yeah.
about working out when's a good time to do this and when's not a good time to do this.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. How much do you think performing is about what you say versus how you say it?
Oh, yeah, that's a really good question. I remember Daniel Kitson once doing one of his sort of work in progress sets and delivering something, and the audience laugh, and he laughed and goes, "I didn't actually say anything funny there. You just laughed at the rhythm of the joke." And then he called back to the other comics and goes, "Hey lads, it's a rhythm gig tonight. You don't need jokes." And he is right. And when comparing, you can say something in a rhythm when improvising that's not actually that funny and still get laughs.
Yeah, it's
So
fascinating,
I
isn't it?
use that quite a bit when improvising with the audience. You can just pause and deliver something like it's a punchline and it will get a good laugh.
Yeah, got it. Got it. How about difficult audiences? Do you have any thoughts about winning them over if plan A isn't working?
Yes. So what I tend to do, if it's not quite working, is to just, and I think it was John Gordillo said this, just take a breath and reset. I've reset at a gig and it's felt like I'd taken time out for 5 minutes. And I've watched the clip back and it's literally a second that I've taken a pause and taken a breath and just take a breath and almost start again and go, whew, maybe you're nervous. It's not going as well. So you've sped up a little bit. You've noticed you've sped up a bit. So just pause. You can take a drink or just move the mic stand or just take a moment. You can take a moment and reset. And it might be you just do that, or you can address it, or you can reset without telling the audience you're resetting. The other thing I do sometimes, if I'm feeling a little bit nervous or just feeling a little bit not quite myself, I'll just scrunch my feet up in my shoes I've got one routine which I do, and it releases something. I've got one routine I do sometimes, this where I pretend to be an army major, and I often just scrunch my feet up when I do it. And actually, fact, it just releases something, and then I'm just more relaxed.
How
Um,
how interesting. You
so
go on, carry on.
yeah, so it can just release any tension because there's often been gigs where you've walked. I mean, I'm sure you've had this yourself. You've walked off stage and you thought, God, that wasn't quite. And then you've watched it back or listened to it back, and actually, fact, it was perfectly fine. It was just something, your internal energy, that was a bit off.
Yeah.
So, and other times I've come off thinking, oh, I've done a great job there. In actual fact, I've watched it back. I thought, no, it wasn't as good as I thought. It was just the fact that I felt comfortable on stage, or I felt it was going well, but actual fact, it wasn't as good or as successful as I thought it had been.
Yeah, right. You
Um,
mentioned you mentioned nerves there, Dowdeswell. Tell me about
yes.
your relationship with nerves over your
Oh,
career.
now this is yeah, this is great. I could do a whole podcast on just this. No, this is interesting. So, when I started, I was quite a shy person. So, the adrenaline got me onto the stage, and I needed to write down everything and be quite scripted and quite heavy on the scripting because I didn't feel comfortable in my own skin. Um, if I had a gig booked to compare, I'd be nervous 3 weeks out because I knew I'd have to come off script, and I used to be terrified of that. But so I think it's so when I started, it was that, and then then I got comfortable in 10 minutes, I was all right, and then when I would do open spots, I remember, for example, driving up to London to do an open spot for Jongleurs, I think it was, or the Comedy Store. And I parked my car on the edge of London. I went back to my car like 4 times to check if I'd locked it because I just wasn't present because my mind was everywhere because
Right.
I realised now I was feeling dysregulated from nerves, sort of rapid cycling. Um, and the first year I signed with International Art, I signed with a lovely woman called Lisa White, who was my first agent. She was fabulous. I had 15 minutes and she would put me into spots doing 20. So I was a little bit out of my comfort zone. So without being too graphic, for that year, I had the squits all year, basically.
Yeah.
But I could, it was because my stomach wasn't settled. And then I think it was a combination of doing those forces gigs toughened me up. And
Yeah.
also, I did a charity gig, a boxing charity gig, where we sort of boxed other comedians. Don't know if you remember, I was up against Patrick Monahan,
I do
and I
remember.
can describe the entire fight because it didn't take long. Um, I went into the ring. He got out of the ring and started going around the entire audience, hugging them. So I was left in the ring for 5 minutes, and to be honest, he won the fight there. So I was getting more and more wound up. So by the time he came into the ring, when we started, I just rushed straight towards him, landed a punch. He didn't expect that, and then he hit me back, which caught me right in the nose, which is a huge nose. I went down, got up again. He whacked me in the same spot again. End of fight. But what it did was, and I hadn't realized at the time, it was actually a brilliant thing because I got punched in the face essentially twice in front of 800 baying drunken Geordies. And
Right.
if you think about it, you're on stage. What's the worst thing that could happen on stage? Somebody could come out of the audience and hit you. It happened to Jim Jeffries and made him a star.
Yeah,
But
right. Yeah.
what's the worst thing that could happen? And I've already been punched twice in a room full of baying Geordies. So it kind of, there was nothing to be afraid of. The
Yeah.
only thing that could hurt me was my ego. But what could you say to me? Oh, you look a bit weird. Yeah, I know. Um, what's the worst that could happen? And suddenly I was like, it didn't happen overnight, but just gradually my sort of fear of anything just went, and I felt very comfortable on stage. But I actually went through a stage where I was so comfortable on stage, my gigs were going okay because there wasn't any nerves. You actually
Right.
need a tiny bit of nerves to uh, fine tune your instrument to make you perform as well as possible. So you and I know that I compare regularly your gig at the Shortlands Tavern in near Bromley, Shortlands.
Our,
Fantastic gig.
our gig, Dowdeswell.
Our gig. I compare our gig. Now, with that, I've got so comfortable on stage there, I can sort of chat to them. So what I do is I make sure I never repeat any material, so I have it all
Hmm.
written down. But I'm trying out a couple of new bits, so those new bits will make me a little bit nervous beforehand to get me going. Because there was one gig I thought it was a bit flat, and it wasn't. It was just the fact I was too relaxed, and so I wasn't building up the audience enough because I was too relaxed. So I thought, right, okay, I need to inject a bit of jeopardy into my own performance.
Yeah,
So
right.
let's try one new joke in the first section to get you focused. And it really worked.
No, brilliant. You go back to a kind of pre-show routine, don't you? It's funny,
Yeah.
like different comics do it in very, very different ways. Some like keeping themselves to themselves, others like almost starting the gig in the green room with the
Yes.
comics. Where do you kind of fall in that category?
This is a brilliant question. It depends. I realize it depends whether I'm emceeing or doing a set.
Hmm.
If I'm doing a set, I'll walk in, I'll be polite, I'll chat to people, but I won't be overly chatty. I'll sort of be in my own head a little bit. And I think most comedians they want everybody else to do well, but they're 90% in their own heads when they're doing sets. When
Completely.
you compare, there's something slightly different that I want everybody to do well. And if somebody doesn't do well, I take a little bit of responsibility that maybe I could have teed it up a little bit differently, or maybe I could have shut that part of the room down that caused the problem. And I will be more open and more chatty because that's what I'm going to be doing on stage. So I'll often be talking. I might even be chatting. Oh, hold that thought and then go on stage. I remember seeing Tim Clark talking about football, pausing the conversation, going out, ripping it at the comedy store, introducing an act, coming back, and then returning to the point in the conversation. I thought that was, my God, I can believe he did that. But now I kind of understand where he was at that point. So it depends which one you're doing. My friend Dominic Frisby mentioned something once that this is about 10 years ago. So and so stormed the dressing room. He said that there was a couple of people who get rebooked quite quickly. They weren't necessarily the funniest people on stage, but were funny in the dressing room. And the reason was the promoters weren't actually watching the show. They're keeping an ear out, but they're in the dressing room. And somebody who makes people laugh in the dressing room, they thought was a better comic than. So I tried it. And I went to the King's Head and reported back. I said, um, I stormed the dressing room, and he never guessed what happened. He told me he'd phone me up for a gig the next day. Um, whereas
Yeah.
and what was interesting was my set was all right, but the previous time was a better set, but I wasn't booked back immediately. But it was more the vibe in the dressing room. So it's an interesting thing.
It's a fascinating thing, and it comes back to the thing about people buying people at the end of the
Yes,
day. If you're self-employed and your job is getting rebooked, then you want to think carefully about that. And you hear examples of that in all different walks of life. My buddy Dom, his boy, plays pro football. He's on the
well,
books at Leeds. And
well,
Dom said that when he was coming up through the youth scheme at Cardiff City, they wouldn't let the parents do anything at games but clap goals
right.
because it would alter possibly what they were trying to get the kids to do. If you've got someone who's really
I see.
loud on the side saying, square it, knock it down the line, or whatever, if that's not what they want to
Mm,
do, and they would actually ask parents to leave the game if they were doing it. And if they persistently did that, they'd go as far as to let the kid go.
Wow.
Because as far as they were concerned, that was just like bad medicine. And,
Yeah.
it's not going to work out. So obviously, the main thing is putting on a show, but being, courteous, or if you can, even better, funny to the
Yes.
people that book you, that makes you stand out.
Yes, there's some people, for example, that might be an excellent comedian, but are very hard on themselves and come off stage and a bit, oh, that went all right. And if you hadn't seen their set, you think, hadn't they doing very well? But they absolutely ripped it. They were just a perfectionist. And somebody else would come off and sort of say something quite confident, and you think, well, it was all right, but they're acting like they're Dave Chappelle. But it's really interesting.
It's
Um,
fascinating. I've actually worked with some comics where it's almost like some kind of Walter Mitty fantasist. They come off and say, "Oh my God, who's booking this? I got to come back here. That was incredible." And you'd be listening to them thinking, "Are we talking about the same gig here?"
Yes, yeah, yeah, it's exactly that. So I think there's a balance. I didn't want to do that,
Absolutely.
and with all these things, there's a fine line.
Absolutely right. Tell me, what do you think is the biggest myth that a lot of people have about confidence?
Hmm. Ooh, that's a very interesting question. I think that it depends on the person. For example, take another football analogy: Zlatan Ibrahimovic, um, superbly confident. But his confidence or overconfidence allows him to do things on the pitch that other people wouldn't dare to do. If he was a little bit modest, he wouldn't try those things.
Yeah,
So there's a fine line. Um, and comedy has a way of, if I'm overconfident about a gig, it won't go as well as I thought. So I tend to respect the gig, um, and take it from there, because it can easily, if you go in too confident, you can easily go, oh, this isn't, I haven't really bought into this yet.
yeah,
And
yeah,
vice versa, if you go in too not confident enough, they can. I mean, my partner Leah always says that when she sees a comedian walk on stage, she wants to see a level of confidence that we're in safe hands.
correct.
So if it's a Christmas gig or something a bit high pressure, I'll walk on far more high status than normal. I'll take a beat. I'll move the stand. I'll I'll be a bit more confident because that's what they need.
Yeah,
They want to be shut. Oh, brilliant! We've got an alpha male in charge of this place. Great. And you don't need to be aggressive, but they need to know who's boss. And
yeah,
I do it in a very gentle way, but I'm still in control of the room. And oftentimes with a Christmas gig, somebody might be talking, and I'll see an act go and say, "Oi, what are you talking about?" Now, I learned this the hard way. Once in Sheffield on a Thursday, the gig was going quite well, and somebody started talking, and I said, "Oi, what are you talking about?" And he went, "Oh, we were just saying we really enjoyed the last joke," and I felt terrible. And all that was happening was it had sparked off a thought, and he was relaying the thought to his friend, and that's fair enough. So
yeah,
now, if somebody's talking, I unless it's persistent, unless it's really disruptive, I don't. I give them one chance because they might be saying, "Oh, uh, I'm feeling my back's hurting," or you don't know what's happening in the room. So
yeah,
I kind of just leave it. Some acts jump on it too quickly, and you think, and then there's a problem, and then the audience person thinks, "I'm being under attack," and then says something, and they wouldn't have said that otherwise. So I tend to
Yeah,
just,
yeah.
so in terms of my comparing, I'm like a referee who allows play to go on. I allow a continuous game.
Nice.
I don't stop things unless it's serious, and then you go, excuse me, we'll stop it. But 9 times out of ten, you can keep it rolling over and think, right, okay, there's a bit of talking. Maybe I'll direct the joke louder in their direction and see if they shut up. And 9 times out of ten, they do.
Yeah, right. Someone once told me a distinction that I hadn't thought of before, and that's the difference between a positive or a negative interruption. It's
Oh,
easy when you first start just to think of all interruptions as negative. Exactly what you said. Groups of people talking, you immediately want to be like, you shut the fuck up and listen to this. But sometimes when you ask what they're saying, maybe it's an observational bit about, I don't know, couples living together, and you'll say something and it sparks a conversation where they're going, you bloody do that, you do that. And you have to differentiate because all they're basically doing there is like rubber stamping your joke.
yes,
Whereas if you're not tuned into that, you can just like get the gun out ready to
yes, exactly.
blow their brains out when you don't actually need to do that.
No, I don't think so. I just talk slightly louder in their direction. The other thing that you won't think about is, of course, especially maybe in a central London or an East London gig, there might be audience members who've taken a bit of drugs. And so they can't keep their mouths shut. But if you start talking to them, you're giving them permission to talk back. And so if there's people like that, just keep a lid on it rather than opening the conversation to somebody who's now given permission to talk. They're not going to shut up.
Absolutely. I've never thought of that before, but there almost should be like a scale of drugs that you would like audience members to
Yeah,
take.
exactly.
Like
Laughing gas.
laughing gas or magic mushrooms would be incredible.
Yes.
I think weed would be okay. They sort of listen
Yeah.
to concepts. But yeah, anything amphetamine based that doesn't allow them to naturally sit still and keep quiet
Yes.
is
And if you want
probably,
people to be quiet, don't engage them in the first place.
yeah.
So I did a thing at a Christmas gig years ago in Brighton. I can't believe it was the late show on a Saturday. And I said, I had big hair at the time, and I said, oh, by the way, there's no point heckling me. I've got blocked ears in a minute. I just won't be able to hear you. And nobody heckled me. I went off stage, and the next act went on and got heckled. Um, it was just because they thought they couldn't hear me. And I thought, wow, I must use that again sometime. I've only ever done it once,
Yeah.
but it really worked.
I very rarely get. I always say when I host shows, because there are some audience members that have got this misplaced belief that they're somehow helping a performance by
Yes.
heckling. And I've always thought that is bollocks. And I now will say to groups, don't heckle. If you get asked a question by the comic, of course answer it, but don't think that shouting something out will make a set funnier. What the comic will have to do is stop and deal with you. And it's actually funnier if you just let them get on with it.
Yeah.
And I always say, I always finish that by saying, if you really want to heckle anybody, heckle me.
Yeah.
I don't care. And yeah, it very, very rarely
Yeah.
happens.
Well, when I started in the late 90s, early noughties, heckling was quite a big thing. There were certain comedy clubs, like Up the Creek, where Malcolm Hardy was on, and the
Did you work
audience,
with Malcolm Hardy?
yes,
Oh,
were professional hecklers.
he's an absolute, he used to basically stir them up, didn't he?
Yeah, oh yeah. And there were professional hecklers, and it was a big part of it. It was quite a sort of gladiatorial thing in the late 90s, early noughties. And you would get heckled. They could say anything they wanted, and you had to deal with it. Sometimes people have heckle put downs. It was best just to actually answer the question. And then we went through a whole period where obviously everyone was nice to each other. The Me Too movement, there was no heckling at all. And now through Instagram, TikTok, there's all the crowd work videos. So now the audiences are quite, I'm not blaming them because they're led to believe now, oh, you have to get involved. So now there's a bit of a misconception at the younger gigs, backyard top secret. There's much more heckling because they've seen all the crowd work videos, so they think that's what it is.
Hmm.
So it's a really interesting way it's gone. With terms with doing the forces gigs, they would heckle you, but that was part of it. But it doesn't tend to be a thing these days.
No, it's not as much. You've done hundreds of gigs. You might have already mentioned it. What do you think, looking back, is possibly the worst gig you've ever done? And why was it so bad?
Uh, well, the second gig I ever did, I asked to have a music to come on to, and I was going to do something with the music, and they put the wrong side of the tape cassette on, so it threw me completely. Um, that was pretty bad. Sometimes there's a set where it's not necessarily your fault. I did a sort of corporate gig with jongleurs a few years ago at Christmas, and at 7 o'clock in the evening, it was perfect for the comedy. But by 9:30, they were all just drunk and tired, and so we didn't. They were just exhausted. So unless you got into them and improvised, and the compere have done all that, so when you're on and you're the second act on, you just had to do material, and it was difficult. So I reset, I squidged my toes, and I just slowed down, and I managed to just about get away with it.
Yeah, right. And what do you think you personally learn more from? Good gigs or bad gigs?
Ooh, good question. You kind of learn from both in a way, um, as long as you can assess yourself correctly. I'll give you an example. I did an hour show in my hometown, and it was just me. And I think I did like half an hour first section, 40 minutes second section. And I remember distinctly mentioning Nigel Farage. And I went away thinking, oh, I shouldn't have spoken about Farage and Trump. That was I lost the audience for a split second. I watched the footage back a few months later, and it came to that bit, and I realized I hadn't lost them at all by mentioning Farage and Trump. It was that the setup for the joke, I stumbled on a couple of words. I wasn't clear. So they didn't know where I stood on Farage and Trump. So I decided to try the joke again. I set it up properly and it worked.
Right.
And so had I not videoed that, I wouldn't have been aware of what actually happened. So what actually happened was I wasn't clear.
Yeah.
And my friend Matt Price was remarking quite recently about how good Russell Kane was, about how good he was in his setups. And I think we often forget that setting up a joke is just letting the audience know exactly what's going to happen. If you don't, they might miss something and they hear a buzzword like Farage or Trump or something like that, and it can go awry. But so that's that.
Yeah, setups are crucial. Absolutely. You've mentioned a few times about watching yourself back. Is that something that you would do after every gig or just ones where you're trying new stuff? How does that work?
Well, so when I started, it was what they suggested you do, or Seinfeld would always say, why don't you take your gig and then you listen back to it? Now, unless I was doing an Edinburgh preview, I never did that. I used to have a cassette and then I'd never listened back to it, but I had it there. Um, and and what happens now is I don't listen back to it straight away. What I'll do is, for example, I did a gig uh, in Poole for Coastal Comedy, lovely gig in a theatre. Now, I'd done that the year before, and I'd videoed it the year before. So that afternoon before heading off to the gig, I watched my set from the previous year so I could tell what I did. So I think, oh, I did all that stuff. Okay, great. Well, I've got some new bits and I'll do some different, just in case somebody's in who's a regular or something like that. So that's often when I'll watch things back. One positive thing about Instagram and YouTube, and when you're clipping up clip bits, you're sometimes looking for a clip and you'll watch bits. So by doing that, I've now actually thought, oh, that's actually quite interesting. So when you clip something up, you want to get as less words as possible to get your 3 second hook in. And you suddenly realize that you might watch yourself and go, oh, there's quite a lot of waffle. I can cut that waffle. So
Mm.
by watching it as a byproduct, watching it online, you can tighten it up. I tend to watch back. I don't tend to watch back 20-minute sets unless something actually happened or I'm trying out a new bit. I might check that or whether I did it right or not. What I do is I watch back my before doing my tour show, my Beers of a Clown show. I'll often watch back a couple of days before a previous hour show that I've done, which just gets me back into the groove of it, the rhythm of it, because it's a little bit slower, and remembering certain parts that I don't normally do. So that's one thing of doing that. Uh,
Got
but
it.
it definitely does help. The other thing is, and I've done this where I was comparing Bracknell, and I remember talking to somebody in the front row, and then in the interval getting back, I thought, oh, hang on, I've forgotten their name. I was able to access my phone, look back at the footage that I'd taken 10 minutes previously, and then oh, it's
Nice.
Trevor and Hillary or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so you can actually use it on the night.
Yeah.
Um,
Nice. Nice. When you first watched yourself back, did you have that thing that lots of people have where you hated how you sounded?
oh, when I listen back on cassette, I really dislike the way I sound. When you hear something on video, it's slightly different to just recorded because you can sort of see something as well, and then you get slowly get used to it. The more you watch something back,
Yeah.
but it really is helpful.
No, it is. I will take people through workshops, and when you get to the last bit, people say, oh, I can't stand the sound of my own voice. And I
Yeah.
always say to them, everyone thinks that when they
Yes.
first hear their voice back.
Yes.
I think assessment of a performance is it's probably the smallest part of before, during, after, but it's also the
Mm.
most commonly neglected part.
Yes.
A lot of amateur speakers will finish a piece of speaking and just think to themselves, thank Christ that's over. I never need to think about that again as long as I live. And if you've finished the last piece of speaking you ever have to do, then that's fine. But in reality, most people haven't done that. And what it means
Yes.
is they just slide down the longest snake on the board and
Yeah.
end up at square one for the next one, thinking, what am I doing? What worked? Oh, shit, I can't remember. Oh, maybe I'll try this. And then they're surprised when I don't know, 6 months, 12 months, a couple of years down the line, they're not getting better at it. And it's like, well, you're
Yeah.
not giving yourself the best chance to get better at it because you're refusing to analyze what you've done.
Yes, there's a lovely gig on a Monday at the Museum of Comedy. What's great, you only get 5 minutes, and there's not that many people in the audience, but they will allow you to die for 5 minutes. So I would always do brand new 5 minutes. I may have done the opening line, I may have done 2 or 3 times, but apart from that, I've been new. Whereas I spotted other people that were doing the same 5 minutes. I was like, but you're not learning anything.
Yeah.
So I find that extraordinary. What I do with the Shortlands gig that we run is I videoed it. I started to video it for clips, and now I video it so I can see what I've done. And then I might forget to write down what I've done. And then I'll go back to it a few days before the next thing. Oh, the last show I did this. Oh, I didn't try that joke about so and so. I'll try it this show. And so
Yeah.
it actually gives me a record of what I've done. It also means that the day after or later that evening on the train home, I might watch those clips and think, how did that new joke perform? And sometimes you think, oh, I can't wait to watch. Oh no, that didn't do as well as I thought it did. Or another one, you go, actually, that was actually quite funny. So you can sort of, and then you'll use those, try them at another gig.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely. When you get a second, by the way, send me through a few little clips that we'll use to plug the autumn shows from the previous one.
Oh, yes, yes.
Sorry, that was unprofessional. I was crossing the
No, no,
beams then.
no.
I took off my hat as a podcast host and put on my promoter's hat for a second, which I wish I hadn't done. Maybe I'll cut it out. Maybe I'll leave it in. Dowdeswell.
So, talking of your gig, the Shortlands gig,
Mm,
what's interesting about that is there's a single spot in the corner of the room. It's great, just shines directly on the face. And because I helped set up, I put it straight to aim at the chest and the head. And oftentimes I go to a gig and I just check where the spotlight is to stand in the light. The amount of comedians that walk forward and then step out of the light. And you think you've just stepped out of the light. So I
yeah.
always check where the light is. I think that's important to do.
Absolutely, that is definitely an important thing to do. And
Yeah,
as soon as you step out of the light, you lose how things like, I don't know, facial expressions work,
exactly.
which can lead audiences. Someone taught me years ago, if you finish a bit and you're supposed to be confused at the end of it, then look confused, maybe scratch the top of your
Yeah,
head,
yeah.
and audiences just kind of follow. Audiences
Yes.
are almost like, oh, that's how I'm supposed to be, is it? He's right. That is confusing. Yeah, I agree with that. And
Yeah.
you are taking all of that out of the armory. I always think
Yes.
the basic spot, the basic tip is if you can't see the light, then you're not in the light. So
Yes.
you've got to stand, even though it's kind of disorientating because it means that you can't see people. What it means is the people can see you, which is the important thing.
Exactly. When I first started, I used to come up to London. The Fulham Palace Road in Hammersmith had a new act night called the Cosmic. I think it was on like a Tuesday night. You were on a very, I used to do quite well when you're on the floor, but when you're on a high stage with bright lights, I didn't, you were playing into darkness and I couldn't play those rooms. I found it very hard. And then the third time I did it, I realized, hang on, if I just literally raise my hand and put it over my the top of my eyes, I could then go hello, do that, and I could actually see them, and I felt I
Right.
could connect with them, and that was a game changer. And then I started to do well at that club, but beforehand I couldn't see them, and I found it very difficult.
It's definitely disorientating when you start. Tell me, Dales, well, you've been doing this for years. What has kept you going while other acts have disappeared?
Well, I don't know if you remember the film Point Break. With
Yes.
Keanu Reeves and Patrick Swayze. That came out when I started doing stand up at university,
Goodness.
and Bodie, uh, Patrick Swayze's character, says he's searching for the ultimate wave,
Right.
and I think what I'm searching for is the ultimate set. Um, I'm always very hard on myself. I was telling my partner this recently. I did a gig in November. I did my Beers of a Clown gig in November at a local brewery in Battersea at Mondo Brewery. There was only 20 people in, but I did two 40-minute sets with an interval and barely any improv. And I came home and I sat in the back of the back garden. I thought, I've completed it. I set out what I set out to do. And 4 years before, I'd gone to Brighton with an idea of doing a show about beer. I talked for an hour, but I didn't really have any much material. And then fast forward to 4 years later, I've done two 40-minute sets on the subject to 20 people. So with 20 people, you're not going to have a wave of laughter. So I really was having to sort of deliver it to the audience, and it made me start thinking, yeah, what am I trying to do? I'm not an artist. I would describe myself as an entertainer. I'm not one of those people who, well, I found it funny, so they need to catch up. I do. I'm an entertainer, but I had in my head that I wanted to be able to do two 40-minute sets. And I remember distinctly sitting in the back garden, just total quiet with me and the dog just on my lap, and just thinking, not that I'd completed stand up, but I completed a task that I'd set out to do. And the other thing was somebody said to me in the interval, oh, in your story, you were talking about, I was like, I really tried to put a narrative arc in it, and somebody had recognized that. So it was sort of I've completed a stage in my development. And it was a
Right.
very clear thing for me. Now, someone else might have thought, well, came away from that gig and thought, well, I gave my best, but there was only 20 people in there, and oh God, I'll never do it. But I wasn't about that. It was about the show worked. And I thought, if the show works like that to 20 people, imagine if I could get 40 people in. But I'm very much a glass half full guy. So I would say my motivation for doing stand up is the buzz of a feeling when a new joke works, and
Yeah.
trying to build a better routine and trying to build a show is the most exciting thing. Without name dropping, I was chatting to Russell Howard about this, who I started out with, and I don't know what happened to him. And his motivation is still the same thing. He said nothing beats the buzz of a new joke working, and that is true.
Hmm.
When a new joke hits, sometimes you do a new joke, it hits, and it will never hit again. It just happens the circumstances were right in that night for that particular joke to work. Um, but I think, and having something to work on, I think that as a comedian, you're like a dropping stone in the ocean. As long as you keep your eye on something, you're fine. But if you lose your direction or lose your motivation, then it can be a very lonely industry. Um, and
Yeah.
sometimes I've got a partner I love, and I sometimes feel terrible but leaving on a Friday night to go and do a gig when I could be at home. So I think to myself, right, if I'm going to do a gig, if I'm going to leave my home, I need to make sure that this gig moves me forward. I put something into it. I don't just phone it in, that I'm trying a new joke. I'm trying to make myself a better comedian.
Yeah, got it. Nice. What's one habit that you've developed that makes you a better performer now than what you were 20 years ago?
Another great question. I think it is reading the room, having a look at
Mm.
the room, and for example, I did a holiday park for Jeff Whiting. I turned up, and there again, the light's quite bright, but I had a look who's in the audience. And everybody, I would say, was over the age of 65. Virtually everybody, apart from one table. So then I thought to myself, this is like doing a gig to my parents and her friends. So I basically reframed it as that. And suddenly it was an easy gig for me to play.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
just looking at the room and just connecting to the Um, so I don't tend to do student gigs anymore. I'm a bit old, but when I was doing them, say 10 years ago, I was aware I was a little bit old for doing student gigs, but I looked a bit younger at the time, so I got away with it. So I remember doing one 10 years ago at University of Norwich, and it was a great bill. I was comparing, it was Ellie Taylor was on. I think it was, might have been like Delicio Tiponda. It was a fantastic bill. Delicio Tiponda, someone else. They were all live at the Apollo people plus me. And I remember thinking, they're younger than me. So on the way up, I put Radio 1 on, and it just got me into a younger mindset. So little things
Nice.
like that. So I might, if I'm going to do a corporate and it's quite businessy, I might put on maybe a Diary of a CEO podcast or a podcast on that subject to sort of get you into that mindset.
Nice.
If I'm doing something at a football club, I'll listen to something football related. I even did a gig at a golf club where I listened to a very boring podcast about a golf professional, but it just got me into that mindset of what I
Nice.
was going into. I did a gig in October where um, it was a book launch for a guy called Guillaume Balaguer, who's a Sky Sports and BBC journalist. And he'd written a book about Aston Villa. He was doing the launch and he was doing it at a pub next to Aston Villa. There were 500, 600 Villa fans packed into this bar, and there were former players as well. And I was initially booked to do a set, and they said, "Oh, you're an Aston Villa fan. Would you like to compare the whole thing?" And I was walking from the hotel to the gig, and I thought, blimey, this is going to be tough. They're all Villa fans. Their football, this isn't the comedy night. And so I'd rehearsed 5 opening bits. And I thought, no, simplify it. 3 opening bits. And I memorized them and just taught myself, practiced them again and again and again, because I knew I had to get their attention and respect off the top. And I thought, then I don't sound like I've got a Birmingham accent, so I've got to address it. So I addressed the fact that I wasn't from here, but this is why I support the team. And because I did that, I did it right off the top. And the relief was they accepted me. But had I not had the nerves and foresight to think about that, I could have easily done my set and I think, who the hell was he? Whereas to do some material you've written that day, but was personal to them in that environment was much more powerful than doing some rehearsed bulletproof material.
Yeah,
So it was
right.
connecting with them, and then I was talked to them, and then I started to put in my material. But I was aware, you've spoken about it before on this podcast, that the big lesson for me was when you're doing a comedy set, you can make it about you. When you're doing a corporate set, or maybe it's a football club, when you're in their space, it's got to be about them. Or if you're doing a comedy set at a football club or a golf club, be mindful that even though it might be about you, you're in their front room. So don't
Yeah.
start bossing people. They are going to move around because they feel comfortable. If they go to the toilet, get up and move, don't mention it. Just let them move around a bit. I learned this doing RAF gigs, and the RAF, one of the things you learn is you're in their mess. So you are a guest in their environment. So you can take the
Right.
mickey out of them, but if they want to get up and move around, or go to the bar, or go to the toilet, or walk in front of you, unless they walk right in front of you, just let them move about, because
Yeah.
you're just going to get distracted. And they're used to it. They don't care. And so just do your thing. So I allow that to happen a little bit as well.
Yeah.
But if it's in a comedy club and they've paid to get in and someone walked in front of the stage, you you better have a good reason.
Yeah. 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 Definitely.
I'll give you one example that years ago, this is about 20 years ago, I was doing a clown course, Angela De Castro's clown course. And I was advised not to do comedy while you're on the clown course because she kind of takes you into a clown state. Anyway, I was a bit skint at the time, always a bit skint. So I did the Friday night, I did the backyard. Now, a backyard back then, wasn't like it is now. There'll be about 400 people in. Lee Hurst is comparing. And I remember he announced me on, and somebody immediately got up and walked off to the bar. Now, we don't know what happened. He might have got a call. It might be the babysitter. We don't know what happened. Now, normally, most comedians, even me, would say something along the lines of, be aggressive to the person, oh, you leave, or, belittle it, or make some comment, be offended and get on the back foot. Because I've done the clown course, I looked at the person, put my hand on my heart, and without saying anything, just followed his gaze all the way out of the room and just looked crestfallen. And the atmosphere, people, it just, there was just an emotion there, and a huge laughter. And then I was allowed to do my, I think, because they just didn't expect that. And that I didn't pre-plan that. It just happened because I was on the clown course. And
Yeah.
that was just being authentic in the moment. And really, most comedians, when they're taking the mickey out of someone in the room, they are feeling hurt because of someone you got on stage and someone's gone on the left. So by me doing a clown, I've never done anything like that since, but
Yeah, nice.
it just it, it gives it's authentic. It's an authentic response.
Yeah, got
And
it. And that
sometimes
is,
the especially at Christmas gigs, there's a slight heckle, and the comics are so hyped up, they jump on it, and they're far too aggressive. And think, don't think the person was meaning that, and they weren't being aggressive. The comedian became aggressive, and then they react, and it all spirals out of control. But it's often the energy the comedian's bringing, not the audience.
yeah, got it. Got it. What do you think in comedy is the quickest way to lose an audience?
Ooh, offend the women.
Right. Yeah, women are 100 times harder to deal with than men because you can be more rude to men and no one minds.
Yeah. If you're
What,
rude to unnecessarily rude to a woman, you will lose the crowd. And there's, um, yeah, I think that's the quickest way to.
I think women are hot. Like a classic bloke's heckle is for someone to shout out, "You're shit," and you deal with that. Whereas
Yes,
in my experience, women are far more likely just to talk amongst each other for the whole thing. If you
yes,
if you want to go down a whole gender bias point of view, I'm sure there are women that have shouted something rude out or blokes that want to talk amongst themselves. But in, all the hundreds of gigs I've done, that's more likely. And then it's a situation where you've got to kind of politely kind of say, look, this isn't a hostage situation,
yeah.
girls.
You just got to do it with a bit more charm, I
If you
think.
prefer just to talk at the bar, that wouldn't be a problem. But
Yeah.
yes, you're absolutely right. What's the quickest way to win an audience over?
Um, well, I suppose a good opening joke, really. If you
Yeah,
deliver a good opening joke, the audience can relax because they think, oh, this guy, girl knows what they're doing.
yeah,
And
right.
you also relax, oh, they've accepted me. So, if you didn't know me and watch me night after night, you might go, hang on a minute, you sort of improvise quite a bit, but you often, when doing a set, will open with a similar opening line. I mean, yeah, that's not, it's almost not part of the act, it's a part of just settled down. And I realized I often use a self-deprecating opening line because when I started, I would think, right, you might heckle me because you think I'm better than you. I don't think I'm any way better than you. So here's a line that takes the mick out of myself.
Yeah,
And the other part was when I started, also, there was, it was a frenzy of heckling. So I'm heckling myself. I'm getting a heckling on myself before you do. Um, so I think some heckles are to take you down a peg if you're too confident. So that kind of did that. Now the difference is I'm doing my beer show, Beers of a Clown. Now when I start my beer show, I don't start like that. I actually start with a give me a cheer if you like a beer, give me a cheer if you like a cider, give me a cheer if you've got a drink problem. Um, yeah, and it just sort of it gets sets does two things. I don't like to do many cheersing things, but it finds out the level of energy in the room, and it just pops it with a silly little thing, and it introduces the subject I'm going to be talking about, and it says kind of I'm going to be doing this in a light-hearted way. Um, so I don't feel the need. Interestingly enough, I don't feel the need to do a self-deprecating line there. Also, if I'm brutally honest, I've done, quite a few solo shows over the years. This is the first one I'm actually, uh, probably the second one I'm sort of proud of, which makes it easier to sell tickets to the show because I believe in it. Previous shows, I thought it's all right, it's quite good, but it could be slightly better. Whereas this one,
Mm.
I'm thinking that yes, it could always improve, but as it is at the minute, it's pretty good. So it's easier to sell because I haven't got enough of an ego. Partner says that, you need a bit more of an ego to perform. But I believe in this show and I think I can entertain people with it. So I find it easy to sell the show.
Absolutely. It's a brilliant show.
And
I've
that was
seen it a few
oh,
times.
bless you. And that was a big step up for me. I've always found it hard to sell shows. And if I'm honest with you, the reason I found it hard was I didn't fully believe in myself or believe in the show enough to say, hey, don't come and take an hour out of your time to come and see me do this. Whereas now I kind of think, do you know what? I can hold your attention for this time. So probably should have thought, been up to that speed earlier, but I
No,
don't
no,
think there's any
no.
harm in it. Um,
I don't think there is either. Here's a question. What's the best piece of advice another comic has ever given you?
ooh, the first bit of advice I remember getting was from Stan Vernon, who used to compare this gig in Macclesfield, and I drove up from Bristol to do the opening 15 minutes for 30 quid after working all day. And
Nice.
he said when I came off the stage, he goes, I like you, son. You're a nice bloke. You turn up on time and you're quite funny. I went, right, what do you mean quite funny? He goes, well, there's a lot of comedians out there, a lot of funny people out there, but and quite a few of them are nice. A lot of them are bloody late and a pain in the ass. He said, if you
Right.
turn up on time, you're quite funny, you'll get a professional career. And I thought it just took the pressure off.
Yeah.
When you start out, you think you have to storm gigs. You don't have to storm gigs. And now I help book with you.
Mhm.
I'm, brilliant if somebody storms a gig, great. But actual fact, you're looking to book a 7 out of 10, and if they take it further than that, great. But you're looking for almost consistency, especially in opening and middle. You're looking for a bankability,
Yeah.
um, and rather than somebody who might blow the roof off but might die, especially if you're the last act. The second bit of advice I had was when I first came to London, I stayed at Ivor Dumbina's house,
Brilliant.
and
I love Ivor. Ivor Dambina.
so
Lovely bloke.
for those of you who don't know, Ivor Kim Dumbina's, oh, he's 70 odd now. He's a Jewish comedian, very good comedian, self-deprecating, classic Jewish style comedian. In fact, I
Yeah,
think he does a show like Jewish comedian show, runs a few
he
clubs.
he
He
does.
used to have a flat in Camberwell, which actually, in fact, he bought off Joe Brand. And I saved up enough money for working in a bookstore to pay for 3 months' rent in advance, in cash, paid him, and I stayed at this flat. And I came up to London specifically to do stand-up comedy. That's all I did. And it was weird that I was using all Joe Brown's saucepans. So when I met Joe Brown years later, I said, I know it's going to sound weird, but I used to live at Ivor Mina's flat, so I've cooked with all your saucepans. And anyway, we joke about the place. And I said, the cleaning lady still talks about you. Not the cleaning lady, the lady who looked after the block of flats. Um, but Ivor came to see me do it. I said, come and see me do a set. And I was quite new. I think he came and saw me do an extended 10 minutes at Ivan's Comedy Gaff. And I said, what did you think? He goes, do you want to know? I said, yes. He goes, my perfect honest opinion is shit. I said, what? He goes, they got laughs. He goes, yeah, what do they know? Yes, you went down quite well. You're a crowd pleasing act, but there's no soul to your act. He said, look, if you went down to the comedy store, they wouldn't remember you in the interval, let alone the day after. I was like, what do you mean? Because, what was. So anyway, I went home. I felt a bit hurt and I got the tube to Oval, and from Oval, instead of getting the bus, I walked all the way home because I'd come up to London to do this and I suddenly found out I was rubbish. And he said, do you want to meet for a coffee? So I met him for a coffee. And what he explained was, yes, what I was doing was perfectly okay, but it was kind of a pop single. It was entertaining. Yes, people were laughing. It was fast food. But if you wanted to be a better comedian, a purer comedian, or even stand out, you've got to do something else. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, what's different about you than other people? I go, so I don't know. I've got big hair. He goes, talk about it. I've got a lazy eye. Talk about it. I grew up in a pub. Talk about it. So he set me on the scene of going, what's different about you? What's interesting about you that other people don't do? And I really have taken that forward. So I'm doing a show about beer, but saying I belong to a beer guild, but the I do actually have a heritage in that. So it's not just me talking about beer. I have a history in it.
Yep.
So that really did set me up. So it was advice I didn't want to hear. Um,
Yeah,
and
yeah, got it.
my partner's very wise, and she was saying about being more authentic on stage. And at the start, I didn't really, she told me things 10 years ago that I'm finally putting into practice now, but I wasn't ready to hear those things. I was a bit like, oh, what do you mean? But as a fact, those things, that bit of advice you get where you go, oh, that's the uncomfortable thing is where you move forward and grow. So being a little bit authentic, being more vulnerable on stage and pushing yourself to go into a subject that maybe wouldn't normally choose.
Yeah,
So I used to do a regular set, and then I was doing my beer show, and it got to a point I needed to try out some beer stuff just to get it up and running. And I started to put it in my set, and I suddenly realised, hang on, this is working. And so, so now I've got another show about wine, so I put that. So now I could put that in my general club set. So I'm moving in a direction, and I can also go, oh, hang on, these guys don't seem to be drinking. I'll just drop all that stuff and I could do something else. But it's it's it just moves you. So I would say if you get a bit of advice that doesn't feel good, sit with it and think about it because it's often the right thing.
yeah, nice, nice. Which comedian do you secretly watch and think, I wish I'd written that?
uh, Mickey Flanagan is a big one for me. So
Right.
when I first came to London, when I was living in that Camberwell flat, I was asked if I wanted to go around to the East Dulwich Tavern to do new material. And I was so sort of nervous how to get there. I'd sort of set off about 3 days before. Anyway, I worked out how to walk there. And what blew my mind was, because there wasn't many comedians on, even though I was a new act, I could go on and watch them for free, or I was sometimes able to go on as well. But it blew my mind because I could suddenly see comedians like Boothby Gaffro, I'd seen at the Comedy Store, trying new material on a piece of paper. So if you've never done stand up before and you're watching live at the Apollo and you think, oh my God, I could never do that, remember that was first said possibly off a piece of paper or a thought out stumbling idea. So I remember watching Mickey Flanagan with a notepad doing for the first time. So this would have been, it must have been spring 2000.
Right.
And then 2001, I went up to Edinburgh and I was part of the Big Value show. In my show, there was in the late show it was Alfie Joey. I was the opening act. It was me, Natalie Haynes, and Howard Reed. But in the first show, there was Alan Cochrane, brilliant, one of my favourite comedians as well, comparing Paul Sinard, Marcus Burban, and Mickey Flanagan. Now I used to get there early, so every night before the show, my show, I'd watch the end of the previous show. So I watched Mickey Flanagan night after night after night after night. And it was just interesting to watch him work because Mickey does something that I've never seen another comedian do. Most comedians have a routine that works. And once it works, it's pretty much word for word per se.
Yep.
Um, Whereas Mickey has a routine that works, but he changes bits. Or he just says it in a slightly different way, keeps it fresh. And, that out routine, and he grew things. And then, yes, he became an overnight sensation, but he'd done the hard work. He was already a fantastic comedian.
Yeah.
So I would say Mickey's probably, I haven't been to see his big tours or anything, but I loved watching Mickey Flanagan. Another favourite of mine is Adam Bloom.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Um, I love watching him work. His timing, just beautiful to watch his stand up. And another one I love watching, and he's brilliant at rhythm. And Russell Howard is I love watching it. I always come away from his watching his stand up thinking, oh wow, feel inspired. It's uplifting. Not only is he a funny comedian, it's all very positive and uplifting. You come away with a sort of feel good glow to it.
Yeah. Nice.
So I
No.
also used to really enjoy the late great Ian Cognito,
Oh,
and
yeah.
and
Right.
people used to say, "Oh, he's offensive." He was never offensive. If you read a script, there was nothing offensive in his script. He just delivered it in an aggressive, almost violent manner.
Yeah, he
But there was
did.
nothing offensive about what he said, in my opinion, anyway. Even now, looking back at it, and anything that was offensive was misheard because it was uh, self-deprecating, or he was the idiot. He'd be
Yeah.
talking about racism and ganging up against the eskies at the bottom of the garden. It'd be something stupid. So
Yeah.
he's basically ridiculing racism. Um,
That's it. That's it. I spent a in Edinburgh Fringe. Me and Ian Cognito became mates and would drink together quite a lot between shows, which, as well as comedy, was another thing that Coggers was very good at. And yeah, we
Professional.
yeah, he was indeed. I used to think he was brilliant. Here's a question. What's one thing audiences never notice about comedy that comedians obsess over?
Ooh. Um, what shirt you're wearing?
Right. Yeah. You
We
wear
often
some
have
lovely shirts.
lucky shirts or lucky t-shirts or blouses or whatever, whereas the audience don't give a monkeys about that. So that will be one thing.
I once did the Bath Festival and I was unpacking and I realized I'd forgotten to pack a belt. But it was about, I think my show was at 6 or 7, so the shops were still open. So I went into Bath and purchased a belt that I wore for that show. The show went brilliantly, and for years after, that was my funny belt. It was
Yeah,
almost like Batman putting it on
yes,
in the Batcave. And I
yeah, it's
used to
incredible, isn't
think
it?
to myself, "Oh, I'm going to be all right tonight. I've
But
got my
yeah,
belt on."
it's how it makes you feel.
That's
If
right.
you've got a shirt or a t-shirt and you feel great in it, you will walk on feeling great. Um, I um, There is a thing, dress for the job you want. For a long time, I wore sort of scruffy t-shirts and jeans. I was a t-shirt and jeans comedian, and I remember being in Jongleurs dressing room in Bristol and Paul B. Edwards saying to me, he was wearing a suit, a lovely mod suit, shiny mod suit, and saying to me, are you going on stage like that? I went, yeah. And Stephen K. Amos, who was compound, said, yeah, well, James is confident. He doesn't need clothes to make himself look more professional. He's naturally funny. Um, but what was actually happening, so there was an air of confidence in me going, I'm dressed like this, but I think back then I wasn't a confident person. So I didn't want to seem anyway showy. So I almost dressed down to perform. But I think there was a whole bunch of us doing that. Everyone was a bit scruffy in the early noughties. That was a sort of a vibe. And then when I met my partner, she comes from a more corporate background. She said, you go and say something like that. And I started dressing up more, putting on nice shirts. I definitely wore nice shirts up north. I remember a friend Gordon Southern going, oh, gig up north tonight, Jim. Better pack a shirt. You got to dress it up a bit. But I started to wear a sort of a jacket and a waistcoat. And a strange thing happened. I turn up and the promoters were like, wow. And they were generally flattered that you dressed up for their gig.
Yeah, right.
And I was like, oh, so you're actually giving the gig some respect. Um, Ninia Benjamin, brilliant comedian, Ninia Benjamin.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
She always says, all these blokes going on stage with an iron shirt and dirty trainers. Whereas I come on stage now. She goes, "Oh, I could tell we gig together, James, because you're wearing box fresh trainers." And it's true. So now I'll sort of whatever you've been doing in the day, maybe you're working, or maybe you've just been in the car, have a change of clothes. So you're changing by changing into clothes, you can relax on the journey because you're not on stage. And then
Yeah.
when you get to the gig, you can still relax, and then you get changed, and then you're getting into your gig character. And this really helps when you're doing a sort of a bigger gig or a more important gig or a corporate gig. You can remain relaxed, and then when you get changed, you can allow yourself a few nerves, and then you're sort of putting your armor on, as it were, and going to do your thing.
I often talk to groups. Part of the mental preparation is what I call like triggers,
Mm,
things that fire you up to get you in the mood to perform. And most
exactly.
people go through their lives without realizing it. Like, I don't know, if you've got a to do list of 10 things to do in a day, some days you'll smash through that to do list by lunchtime. And there'll be other days when you're looking at the same to do list and you've done two or three out of those 10 things. And the whole
Yes.
day's been like pushing shit uphill and you can't work out why. Well, none of those 2 days are down to chance. They're
Mm,
both down to things that you either have or have not done to get you in the mood to perform. And what I
yes.
think a lot of elite performers do is they work out what is on their checklist to do. It might be exercise, it might be sleep, it might be clothing, it might be food, it might be music. Whatever it is, they go, right, I've got a gig now. I know what shirt I'm going to wear. I know what I'm going to
Yeah.
listen to on the way up. Ideally, I'm going to have this much sleep the night before. And there might be the odd gig where one of your preparations, for whatever reason, doesn't work, but you still got all of the rest of them that you've done. So I'm a firm
Yeah.
believer in processes, in
Yes.
routines before you start, because it gives you consistency in a world that otherwise is quite varied, isn't
Yeah.
it?
I think you're absolutely right. And to be honest, I was terrible at this 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. I'd be going to a gig and I'm trying to find the charger plug or I'm trying to find that t-shirt or that. And what I realized I was doing now was keeping myself in a nervous cycle, preparing for the nerves of the gig. Whereas now, what I'll do, because I'm doing a few sort of courses about the nervous system, I'll prepare things beforehand. I had a chat with my partner earlier. I'm feeling strangely nervous. I'm doing a podcast. Why am I feeling nervous? She goes, have you prepared for it? I went, oh, I was just about, I just need to sit down for 10 minutes and just write down a few things. And once I write down a few things, I'd had it prepared. And then just before the podcast started, she asked me if there was a hat. Now, I didn't run around looking for this hat. I just ambled around. I felt very relaxed. And now, I mean, this isn't my thing, it's her thing, but have a go bag, have nowadays I've got a rucksack and it's got in a charger, a tripod for filming gigs, a few things I'd need that I always need. So I just hang that up and that's just ready to go.
Yeah,
Um, if I've got a corporate gig now, I will now get my suit ready or get things ready or access them, check the shirt is washed, ironed, etc. the day before. So I'm not running around. If on the day something happens, it doesn't matter because I'm already ready. And now also, well, if I've got a show that I'm a bit worried about in a week's time, I'll start prepping it a week beforehand because you never know what will happen that could knock you off your stride. I don't want to leave. So I think what was happening was I was leaving things to the last minute, keeping myself in a cycle of nervous energy, whereas actual fact, I needed to prep for them beforehand. So
brilliant.
I've got a tour coming up we're booking it at the minute for my beer show. So I'm just making a list of things that I might need: a new light, new backdrop, um, writing some material. So I'm writing material in advance. I did a TED talk, and in that, I started writing that a year beforehand. Also, had to do a palm beer show. They wanted me to do 5 minutes of mental health stand up. So I was really nervous about that. So 9 months before I started trying it in the clubs. So by the time it got round to it, I was ready. So it's about realizing what you're nervous about or what and tackling that head on rather than just leaving it to the last minute. And it's so easily done. We all do that sort of thing, and I'm very reactive, and I'm trying to teach myself to be more proactive.
Brilliant.
Um,
Well, mate, I think that is a wonderful tip for everyone listening to end on. It's so easy just to look at a performance and just assume that whoever's done it could just always do it, like how birds know to migrate south for the winter or something. But part of this podcast is, scratching away at the surface and showing people the preparation and the thought processes that go in to making something good. And I think anyone that does any form of performance through communication can really think of that. Dowdeswell, my dear fellow, last question on the tiniest of off chances that anyone is listening to this for the first time, finding out about James Dowdeswell. What is the best way for them to connect with you and to find out where your brilliant Beers of a Clown tour is coming?
well, first of all, thanks so much for having me. I love this podcast. I've heard numerous ones, and so it's a joy to be on it. You can find out about me if you just tap in James Dowdeswell into Google, or follow me on Instagram at James Dowdeswell Comedian.
Fantastic. And put more clips up because your clips are so funny. Dowdeswell's crowd work is just phenomenal. So that is definitely something or someone to watch. And hello to that very well behaved dog that is very considerately
Yes,
waited until the end of the interview to sit on your lap and start licking your face.
exactly. Yeah,
Good
just they
stuff,
were
Angel. Nice to see her. She's looking well, as are
fabulous.
you, my friend. Dowdeswell, I can't thank you enough for your time doing this and your brilliant considered answers.
Brilliant. Can I plug one more thing?
Many things as you want.
The last Thursday of September, you and I have the 10th anniversary show of Smirk Experience at the Shortlands Tavern. We're not going to say who we've got but it's going to be a cracker.
It's going to be awesome. And that is in my diary. I can't wait for that. There'll be details of that on smirkexperience.com and also on our socials. And so find us, give us a follow. And if you're anywhere near South London, get yourself along to that date because, as Dowdeswell says, it will be a banger. Dowdeswell, thank you so much for your time, buddy, and all of your brilliant answers. And I very much look forward to our paths crossing again in real life very, very soon.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
What a legend. There he goes, my mate, Mr. James Dowdeswell. I think there were loads of tips in that episode, but as ever, here are 3 from me. Firstly, when you finish speaking, don't just think, thank God that's over. Instead, analyze it. It'll never be as bad as what you think, and you will learn so much. Secondly, read the room. Don't use a cookie cutter, one size fits all approach to speaking. Instead, adapt to the room and your audience and address any elephants in the room early. Number 3, reliability beats brilliance every day of the week. You turn up on time and you're quite funny was a review from a booker that got Dowdeswell a whole career. Consistency is the key, not the odd home run. Thanks for listening to Before, During, After, a Smirk Experience podcast about performance from the inside. If you've enjoyed it, why not share it with someone else who you think might get it? And give us a follow while you're at it. See you next time.